is Julie, and I don't know what she's got going. All I know is she came in and she said, I need a knife. I'm going to go cut vegetables. Now, I have no idea what's happening. I don't know what vegetables have to do with the lesson, but I think it's going to be fun. We are continuing today with our conversation about friending. And, you know, it's interesting because we are here on Mother's Day, and who teaches us as we grow up about being a good friend? It's our moms, right? It's our moms, it's our dads. It's those people that pour into us. And I bet if you look back, you can remember a time when maybe you were having a spat with somebody, and your mom stepped in and she said, now listen. Or maybe your grandma stepped in and she said, now listen, we don't treat people that way. Anybody ever have that conversation? We don't treat people that way. We learn from our moms because they learn from their mom, who learned from their mom, that the way we treat people is the most important thing. It's a biblical principle, amen? Do unto others as you would have them do to you. So you want somebody to treat you well, what should you do? Treat them all the better, right? Don't go swinging fists, because when we start swinging fists, what happens? Fists come a-swinging, don't they? Ever notice that about people? It's funny where we think, well, how dare they? Well, if we take up the how dare theys with them, often it doesn't go well for us. Ever notice that in an argument, it never really ever ends well? We get taught by our parents, listen, no, we treat people, no, keep your mouth shut. Anybody hear that one? I heard that one a lot as a kid. Would you just keep your mouth shut? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Moms and dads, they pour into us. And with moms specifically, moms have a heart that dads don't have. Dads don't take this personally, okay? But like I said before, dads, we have a tough, right, that moms don't have. Listen, sometimes we got to rub some dirt on it, right? But sometimes we need a little salve, and we need a pat on the back and a rub of the shoulders that says, hey, it's okay, it's going to be all right. And moms have this way with words, and how we deal with words, and how we do what we do, that pours into us and impacts us for a lifetime. You remember when we started this series, I gave you this verse, Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20. It says, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. Show me your friends, and I will show you your future. Many of us were blessed with parents who loved us. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you weren't blessed with parents that really poured into you, but somebody along the way has poured into you, and they have told you, you know what, you are who you hang out with. And they have said to you, listen, you hang out with that crazy kid, you're going to get in some crazy trouble, right? But they have also taught us that if we hang out with faith-filled friends, you're going to be faith-filled. You want to hang out with lazy, critical, self-centered friends, you're going to wind up probably being lazy, critical, and self-centered. We are who we hang out with. Remember last week I talked about how you are a combination of your top 5 friends. If we look at your financial situation, if we look at your outlook, the people that you hang out with the most is the people that you become the most like. Those of you who have been married for years and years, I can look at you and I know you're married because you become more and more like each other. And we talked about last week the three types of poverty that strike us. They are material poverty, they are spiritual poverty, and they are relational poverty. And so, what causes relational poverty? Increased mobility. We can go anywhere we want to, right? When you were a kid, you probably had some close friends that lived in your neighborhood. I know I, as a kid, was blessed. I lived in a small town in southwest Kansas, and my dad would say this, it's summertime, and I would get my bike out, and he would go, "Where are you going?" I'd say, "Well, I'm going to go visit my friend Pete." And then we were thinking we were going to ride over to Jimmy's house. Now, these are on opposite ends of town, 3 miles by 3 miles. And my dad would say, "Okay, that's fine, but round about dusk, you need to be within my voice shot, so that when I yell, 'Michael,' you come a-riding." And so my friends were in that little 3-mile circle. And we would play from the time that we could get out of the house in the morning after we were done with chores till it was time to come home and go to bed. And we would come home and we would be worn out. And we would get up the next morning and we would do it all again. And we became just like one another. As an adult, one of my best friends from the time I was in 8th grade, his name is Bill. And Bill and I, from 8th grade through high school, for our first 2 years, 3 years of high school, or 2 years of high school, we always shared a locker. And we were best friends. We went to church together. We would hang out on weekends together. And he was the nephew of my youth pastor. And so when I was 16 years old, and I've told you this story before, when I was 16 years old, I went to live with my youth pastor because my stepdad passed away. My mom left when I was 12, and so I didn't have anywhere to go, and my youth pastor took me in, and so Bill and I we even shared a room for the last 2 years of high school. We were inseparable. But along comes college, right? And we can go different ways. And so he went to one school and I went to another. And then we wound up going back to school together our last 2 years of college. But now we're miles and miles apart. And we're still friends. We still talk. I'll call him once in a while. He'll send me a text once in a while. But we're not close like we were. Why? We got married, we got mobility, we live in separate towns. And so, in this modern era, more and more of that is happening. Ever notice that young people don't stay at their homes much anymore? Oftentimes, their thought process is, you know what, I'm going to get out of this town. And so, they work through high school. They get out of high school, they go to college off somewhere else. They get done with college and they go somewhere else. Our workforce has changed. We now live with a global economy, right? So you can go work just about anywhere. And now, with the pandemic, we're finding more and more people are working from home. So they're not even working in the workplace anymore. And the results are we're becoming more and more and more disconnected. The other thing that's happening is modern conveniences. Air conditioning allowed us to go inside when it was hot, right? No longer are we hanging out in the shade in the front yard. We have made our way first to the backyard because that was a little more private, and now we're inside all the time because air conditioning. Garage doors aren't open anymore. They're closed. We got garage door openers, so when we show up home from work, we can just push the button, drive right into the garage, turn off the car, push the button, and our neighbors never even get to see us anymore. Modern conveniences. We have an answering machine and a caller ID, so we don't have to answer the phone if I know it's so-and-so calling. We do all of our shopping online, right? How many of you are Amazonians? Look at that. I'm an Amazonian. I like to shop on Amazon. You know why? I think Walmart's crazy. And so we do all our shopping online. We've even taking out these little devices that we carry around with us, and we don't even watch TV as a family anymore. I realized the other day we were sitting in our living room, and it was about 8 o'clock at night, which is just about time for the kiddos to go to bed. And I realized I'm watching a video on my phone, my wife is watching a video on her phone, and my kids are watching a video on one of the tablets. Family time. Oh, how connected. And the final thing that is leading to this relational poverty is the rise in social media, right? We talked about this last week. So what does this do? It replaces relationship with deferred loneliness. So the more clicks I get, the better I must be liked, or the more friends that I have, some of whom I really have probably never even met or have barely connected with on a deep level, they're now my friends. I post, I upload, I tweet, and I get immediate feedback, right? Because somebody cares. And it momentarily takes care of that lonely feeling. But at the same time, something is missing. At the same time, this thing, this tool, and it really is a tool, when it's used correctly, it's useful, drives a wedge in us. And it separates us. I find myself asking the questions oftentimes, what has happened to us as a country? What is going on with us as a country? We spend more time on social media than we do actually spending time with one another. We think that we've related to somebody because of what we posted or what somebody else posted, rather than influencing other people with relationship to change who they are and who we are. And so here's the thing today that I want to talk about. You are one community away from changing the course of your destiny. If you remember last week, we talked about you are one friend away from changing the course of your destiny. But today I want to talk about we are one community away from changing the course of our destiny. In Oklahoma, my wife and I were part of a very, very large church, but it didn't always feel like a very, very large church. This church was very intentional about putting us together in smaller arenas, smaller church feel, so that we got connected. And one time, the people asked the pastor, somebody from outside of the church asked the pastor, what's your secret to how you keep that many people together? And his statement was very simple. We create community so that people can't get lost unless they choose to. And that stuck with me. It surprises me to think that a church that size, this was a church that had 5 services a weekend, a church that size could feel like home. Because I'd been to large churches before, But I never felt like I always felt in a small church. But I did there. And it was because we lived in community and we connected with one another in such a way that those were my church friends. That was my church family. We checked on one another. We had meals together. We played games together. We served together. They had been very intentional about creating community, and that had made all of the difference. In Acts chapter 2, what we see is this picture of what the church ought to be. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 46 says this: They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. Well, what did we do this morning? We got together. We broke bread together, right? Anybody stay and eat this morning? We've already broken bread together. Thus, guys that were back there, we had a fun time this morning. I mean, we were cracking each other up. We were cracking eggs up. It was good. They devoted themselves to fellowship. If you were here for breakfast, you know what? You had a good time, right? And we talk together and we get to see one another. We've already prayed together several times this morning. And then they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, meaning they got together and they did the exact same things that we are doing right now. That creates community. In verse 43 it says, Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Listen, it always amazes me how quickly God answers our prayers when we have the prayer chain go. I cannot tell you how many times since I have been here that we have had moments where it's like, that's definitely a God moment. And it's because why? You have devoted yourself to prayer and praying over God's people. And I'm in awe. Verse 44, all the believers were together and had everything in common. Mi casa es tu casa. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Anybody here ever gotten something from the church because, you know what? We take care of one another. That's what community does. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. And so, from this, I think that there are three qualities that we can see that make great community. And it's important for us as a church to be mindful that this is what we are doing. You know why? Because the example has already been set. The first thing that we should do is this: we should treat one another better than family. Wait a minute. What did I just say? We should treat one another like family? No. We should treat one another better than family. Why better? Listen, I love my family. But there are times, and my wife has seen it, on my side of the family, we have this little thing we call sarcasm. We think it's funny, and we will wield barbs at one another and it just comes out, right? And it's kind of painful, and so we've learned to wield it back because it's just a little painful. But you do that with a complete and total stranger, you have lost the complete and total stranger. I remember the first time I brought my wife, she was not my wife then, okay? I brought my girlfriend to visit my grandmother for Thanksgiving. And my sister was there. And there were some zingers back and forth between her and I, and my wife was like, do you guys always treat each other this way? And I'm like, what do you mean? This is great. But it's not so great. Whether you realize it or not, sometimes you'll say something to family that is probably not appropriate, right? You treat them and you love them, right? How many of you actually love your family? It's okay if you're like, my family's a little rough. I love my family. My family is a little rough. But I know that they love me too, and unfortunately sometimes that means that I take liberties that maybe I shouldn't take. And that's my challenge to us, is to say, you know what, we need to treat people better than family. We want people to feel like this is home, right? And so for many of us, this is home. I've heard so many stories about, from each of you about, when we started coming here and the people are just so friendly. I just heard this morning that we're just so friendly. And we really, really are. But be mindful that we treat one another better than we even treat family. Acts chapter 2, verse 44. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Listen, make sure that when people come in the door, we're greeting them. Make sure that they know, you know what, you're important, and I'm glad you're here, and I want to get to know you. And hey, would you like to go for a meal? And hey, let's connect sometime. Do you like coffee? Yes. Take care of one another. You guys do a fantastic job of this, right? I mean, right now, we've got people taking meals over to the Strimples. We take care of one another. We make sure that people have what they need, because we're not just family, we're more than family, right? And here's the deal. Each one of you that's here this morning that has said, you know what, I believe that Jesus Christ is my Savior, and that one day I am going to heaven. Think about that. If you look around the room, you're stuck with one another for all of eternity, right? So look at the person to your left and say, hey, I'm stuck with you. Look at the person to the right. Say, sorry, you're stuck with me. We're stuck. Probably better treat each other better than family, right? The second thing that we all have to realize is this. We all have flawed feet. What do you mean by that, Pastor Mike? Well, here's the thing. I was a youth pastor for 20 years. And I've been to many a convention in Michigan, we had this snow outing in the middle of winter that we did. And my teenage boys would take off their shoes when they would get back to the cabin. Flawed feet. Very flawed feet. Right? Because unfortunately, sometimes when we take off our shoes, there's this stench that comes, right? And you're looking at me like, ew, that's gross. But here's the reality. Every one of us is that way. When we're doing life, when we're busy, we got stuff that stinks in our life. Every one of us has flawed feet. Some of us come with injuries, right, that make it hard for us to get around. Some of us, we're flawed in other ways. We have a little something that holds us back from really being or participating in a way that maybe other people do, and that's okay. Remember I said we treat everybody better than we treat family. And that means even those that are flawed. And let me tell you something. If you realize it, you've probably got some flaws yourself. If you realize that when you take off your shoes, it's not always pretty. There's a little green cloud that kind of hangs about in the air for just a little bit. In Romans chapter 15, verse 7, Paul says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. Listen, we got issues, right? We all have our stuff. And sometimes we will try to cover it up, and we try to make it look really nice on the outside. I have a cup here. And on the outside it's nice and red. And this cup is nice because it's got ice water in it, right? But sometimes it's like washing the outside of the cup, but the inside of the cup has that ring and it's got some mold growing. That's how we are sometimes. And we need to acknowledge that, you know what, I don't always have it all together. And then the rest of us need to be okay to say, you know, I get it. It's okay. Sometimes I have to acknowledge that I'm just Michael, and I'm vulnerable, and I've got my weaknesses. Sometimes my feet stink. Sometimes we have to be willing to take the risk. You know, here's the thing is, on a much more inside level, there are some of you who maybe as kids you had disciplinary challenges, or maybe as parents you had kids that had disciplinary challenges. Some of you, maybe you had a family that neglected you, or maybe you realized that as you were growing up your kids, you may be sometimes neglected, not intentionally, but you did. Some of us, we struggle with materialism. We just got to have the next thing. Some of us, we struggle with just being a spiritual leader in our home. We're all invited to the table, even with our flawed feet. In 2 Samuel, there's a story about a gentleman, and I'm going to struggle with his name. His name is Mephibosheth. Say that 3 times really fast. Mephibosheth. See, I told you, I tried it all week. I knew that was going to happen. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. He lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. So he lives there, but he was lame in both feet. He was allowed to eat at the king's table even though he had the messed up feet. So today, where are your messed up feet? What is it that you have going on that you just need to acknowledge? You know what? When I take off my shoes, this stinks. The third and final thing that will help us to make great community is this: we're going to fight lions together. You say, Pastor Mike, what are you doing? Listen, there's a story, actually a video, you can go look it up on YouTube. It's called The Battle at Krunger, K-R-U-N-G-E-R. And if you watch the battle at Krunger, what happens is there are these water buffalo, and they are doing their thing, and then along come these 3 lions. And what I mean by doing their thing, I mean, we've all seen videos, right, where a lion comes and hunts. Well, this battle at Krunger happens, and they pick out, as they always do, the lion picks on the weakest, right? And so they pick out what they view as the weakest water buffalo, the slowest one. And these lions attack this water buffalo. And initially, all the other water buffalo, they're scared. And so what do? What do you do when you're scared? Mostly run, right? Some people will stay and fight. Most will run away. And initially, that's exactly what happens. And here's this water buffalo swinging its head to and fro, giving it the fight of its life, but against 3 lions, it's no bueno. And finally, one of these lions reaches up and he grabs this water buffalo in such a way that the water buffalo lets out this sort of cow-like, almost a scream, and that catches the attention of all of the other water buffalo. So suddenly, some of the bigger water buffalo turn around and they're like, wait a second. And then you see them, they don't come running back. They just together turn and start walking back. And the first lion, as it's at the backside of this buffalo trying to pull it down, sees them coming and just sort of saunters off like, I didn't do nothing. And so pretty soon this other lion kind of looks from its angle, and you see it, and it's like, uh-oh, here come the water buffalo. And it lets go. And the only lion that's left is the lion that's got control of the head, and it is trying its best to bring down this water buffalo. But then these other water buffalo are right on top of it. And guess what? That lion says, adios, and let's go. And it's called the Battle at Krunger because this is where this happens. But these water buffalo turn, and together they face the obstacle that the weakest one is fighting with, and it's left alone. And this water buffalo collects itself. It's got some bruises and some scratches, but it's really no worse for the wear. And the rest of the water buffalo surround it, and they walk away. We have to be willing, when the weakest of us is hurting and in a bad spot, to instead of be afraid, turn and together face whatever it is and help them fight the lions that are going on in their life. Peter puts it this way, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. If you are independent, you are vulnerable. We live in a society where a lone wolf is looked upon as a good thing. Oh, he's strong and independent. Here's the ticker. By yourself, you're not going to be able to face all of the arrows that hell has to throw at you. This is why it's so important that we forsake not the gathering of the believers, because there's strength in numbers. There is strength when you look to the person to your left and when you look to the person to your right. There is strength when we call one another and we pray for one another. There is strength when somebody's going through whatever it is in their life and they know that you're behind them. And you never know. That might be the final straw that lets them go, you know what? I've got this. I'm finally going to break this. You don't know the difference that you make in somebody's life when you are just there and present. It doesn't mean that you have to say anything. Some of the best things that have ever happened in my life have been because just somebody was there. And they didn't, because they couldn't, say anything that would make it better, but their presence, being in the room, let me know that it was going to be okay. We treat one another better than family. We all have flawed feet. We fight lions together. Church, I want to be a church family where everyone wants what we have. And the reason I want that to be the case is because that always tells you that that's a really, really special place. I want to be the place where people look and they go, you know what? That place is different, and I want to be there. In John chapter 13, verse 35, it says this: "Everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." Creating a tight community takes time. It takes us being intentional. It takes us doing life together. It takes us serving together. We do so many things in life alone, and the church ought not be that place. There's a story of a lady by the name of Yvette Vickers. And back in the day, she was a B-movie star. She's most famous for her role in The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. You ever see those monster movies when you were a kid? And this was her most famous role. She had a neighbor. Her neighbor's name was Susan Savage. It had been some time since Susan saw Yvette, and she found herself wondering what was going on. She began to notice that at her apartment, cobwebs were starting to form on the doors, just outside. And she thought, I need to find out what's going on. So, she managed to also notice that junk mail was collecting, and she called the police. And they went upstairs to her apartment to find Vickers' body, mummified. She was near a heater that was still running, and her computer was on too. The Los Angeles Times posted a story headlined, "Mummified Body of Former Playboy Playmate Yvette Vickers Found in Her Benedict Canyon Home." That story quickly went viral on Facebook, of course, talking about the loneliness of this lady who once upon a time seemingly had everything put together. But it was quite some time before they ever found her. And I think to myself, what a sad story. But what a sad situation, because we can often put ourselves in those kinds of places. We need each other. We need community. And church, we're responsible to make community happen. We're going to sing a song. I would invite you, just during this time, ask yourself, ask God, ask the Holy Spirit, Spirit, would you reveal to me the things that I need to change so that I become more communal in my thinking, in my processing, so that I become more like who you desire for me to be? And how can I help, Lord, to make this the kind of place that is a community where people want to be.